Hello, listeners. Welcome to Two Soka, Two Sisters of a Certain Age, Conversations with a Therapist.
And a doctor.
I am Judy Grant, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Dr. Sophia Grant, board certified child abuse pediatrician and board certified pediatrician.
Okay, so my title is not that big, but it's so good to have you here with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We are embarking on season 2 of Two Soka.
Season 2. Yeah.
I can't even believe that we're at this place already. It's been so much fun. But I can't believe so much time has passed by that we're actually moving into our second season.
And we have big changes. First of all, we are going to be on YouTube. We were always on YouTube, but it was just our voices. Now you get to actually see us on YouTube. Yeah, so you can see what we look like. And you guys get to see that my power color is pink. You see the pink headphones, pink sweater.
Yeah, I've got the red, but I want the pink.
Do you have a power color?
No, not a go-to.
Really?
But I do love red. I do love a great red dress. There's nothing better than that.
You get that from mommy, but
yes, I do.
When I have to go to court, I always wear pink.
Yeah.
And everybody know, like if they see me in pink, Dr. Grant, are you going to court today? So
it's bold. It makes a statement.
Right.
Yeah. So along with being able to see you and you seeing us, we're going to be doing some cool things with merchandise.
Yep.
So you're going to be on the lookout for some Two Soka merch. We don't have it yet, but it's all in the works. We are looking at creating a Patreon page. So we have some really cool things happening as we grow, as our audience grows. We just want to bring you more and more Two Soka to fill.
And we're also going to have a website. So that's in the works. So lots of exciting stuff coming your way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, thinking now about how we wanted to start season 2, we wanted to share a really cool experience that Candy and I had just about a month ago. Mm-hmm. And we were invited to speak at a conference. Candy, do you want to tell us a little bit about what that was?
Yes, it was called the Nexus Conference, and it was started by a child abuse pediatrician many years ago, over 2 decades ago. And it was a conference addressing child maltreatment, child abuse. And Judy, you were the one to tell me about the conference. Remember, you went to lunch with somebody and they said, "Oh, this would be a good conference."
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I sent in the application and we were selected to speak. And it was really exciting because when we started Two Soka, we said, okay, what are our goals? And we wanted to have speaking engagements. And we started in October, and our first speaking engagement was in March. And then we eventually want to get paid speaking engagements. And then we want to be invited on TV shows to speak as a doctor and a therapist. And then what else do we want?
Oh, I want a billboard and I want Oprah.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we want. And I feel like if you don't put it out there, then you're less likely to receive it. But we have big plans. So we were invited to speak at this conference. There were so many people who wanted to hear our topic. We were actually put in the main room, which made us feel pretty special. And I think it was because our topic was so timely. It affects so many people. Judy, what did we talk about?
We talked about early childhood trauma and the impacts of that on the medical perspective as well as the mental health perspective. So we really focused on the fact that yes, trauma occurs, but trauma does not have to define you. Trauma does not have to manifest throughout the course of your life. You can acknowledge it, process it, work through it. utilize proper interventions to find a way to move beyond it. And the truth is, we never forget the trauma that we experience, but we can find ways to move beyond it, move through it.
Right. I first heard about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, back when I started my fellowship in child abuse. So that was about 2006. And ACEs was actually based on a study by a Dr. Vincent Folletti many years ago. I can't remember what year it was. That was it
I can't
2003?
remember.
I can't remember. Anyway, it's a seminal study because it talks about how trauma as a child will affect your adult health, how it can affect your adult health. And then I read a book called The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who happens to be a Jamaican. And she is she was the first Surgeon General for the state of California. And her book addresses some things that she was observing when she was in private practice, not in private practice, but working for a community medical center up in the Oakland area, and how these kids, their trauma manifested in maladaptive behaviors. I think we kind of intuitively know that, okay, if you have lived a rough life, you're going to have difficulty in adulthood. You're going to be more likely to use drugs and alcohol. But I don't think anybody fully realized how strong the effect of trauma would be in adult health. And we just wanted to share some of that with you. This is going to be one of the more clinical two SOCA episodes, but I think it's going to be really important to listen and learn, because sometimes when you've experienced trauma and your life may not be what you want it to be, you will kind of point to yourself and think, why am I like this? Or I'm such a failure. I'm a loser. But it's not your fault. It's so not your fault. Judy, when we spoke, she talked about Goodwill Hunting.
I did. I
Mhm.
did. So, before I talk about the example from Goodwill Hunting, I just want to point out that we wanted to share this with you because so many of us experience trauma in our childhood. And Dr. Nadine Burke Harris coined the term toxic stress, and how the accumulation of that toxic stress, that trauma throughout your childhood, has these medical outcomes, has these negative mental health outcomes. Um, and just acknowledging that this is an issue and that we need to take note of this and work to help those people who have experienced that trauma move beyond is critical for all of us. So, the scene in Goodwill Hunting, Matt Damon and Robin Williams. Matt is in a therapy session with Robin Williams, and Robin's character, as the psychiatrist, kept telling Matt, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." And Matt was, no, no, not accepting it, not accepting the fact that he did not have any part in this. And the tears came, and Robin was holding him, saying, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." Because these things that occur to us in childhood, as a child, we don't create this situation for ourselves. We are often born into the situation that then might create the trauma. But it was none of Matt's decisions as a young child, Will's decisions as a young child, to experience any of the things that he did. So when Robin was saying, "It's not your fault," for Matt to then reprocess that in his mind and begin to think differently about that whole scenario was very significant to his healing. And I think up until that point, nobody had ever said, "Hey, this is not your fault."
Yeah, and The circumstances that you can't control, we're just going to go through it a little bit. It falls into three categories. It's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So abuse could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, being told you're not worthy, you won't amount to anything, you're ugly. And it's neglect, whether it's emotional neglect, it is could be purposeful or just circumstances due to poverty and your parents can't provide for you. Then household dysfunction. That could be having an incarcerated parent. It could be somebody who has mental health issues, divorce. What else?
But you can also think about domestic violence in the
Yeah,
home. If you as a child, you're witnessing domestic violence perpetrated by perhaps your father against a mother, against a grandmother, um, that can also truly affect you. That has a significant effect. That is indeed traumatic. I think people think, oh, DV, there was DV, but they don't really understand that for the child witnessing, that is a traumatic experience for them and how helpless they feel. And as they're looking at their loved one being victimized by this,
right.
and them being little children, not being able to step in, not being able to protect this person from somebody else that they love is is a horrific thing for any child to have to go through.
Right. And then I also want to talk about sexual abuse because I see so much of that in my practice. Some of these kids, they come in and they have experienced sexual abuse. And maybe they were told, if you tell, I'm going to go to jail, or if you tell, you're going to get taken away. And so they keep that secret. And the kids who I see, obviously, they're seeing me because they've somehow disclosed, whether on purpose or accidentally. And I ask them how they feel now that it's out in the open. And those kids, one girl said, I feel lighter. I don't feel heavy anymore.
Because they're carrying the secret.
It's a big burden to carry. And now that it's out in the open, hopefully they're able to move beyond it. Most kids don't want the perpetrator to go away or go to jail. They just want it to stop. And I talk about jail because most of the times the perpetrator is somebody known to them. It's somebody that they love. It could be a sibling, a step parent, a parent, a cousin. But yeah, the kids feel lighter and they feel like they can finally move on. Something that I also observe in kids who have these burdens is that they end up self-harming. A lot of cutting. And cutting is something that I didn't understand. Honestly, did anybody cut when we were growing up? I never saw cutting or heard of cutting.
It wasn't, you know what? I believe it was happening. We just did not hear about it. It was not being reported at
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah. So I didn't understand cutting. And then one time I read about it, and this girl said she had so much going on in her head and she was so lost in her thoughts that it felt like a relief to have
Mhm.
something external to concentrate on.
Right,
So
right.
she didn't have to be in her head. She could look at her arm that was bleeding and get a relief from the trauma. And yeah, it was a huge realization for me. And although it's a horrible thing, I get it now. I
Mhm.
really get it. And I saw a young woman on Friday who had cutting, and it's just a really common thing.
Yeah.
So, Judy, let's talk a little bit about how trauma in childhood can be mistaken for oppositional defiant disorder.
So I first want to point out that the cutting or the use of alcohol and drugs is a maladaptive coping skill that children, adults go to. They
Or
don't know how to,
sex.
or
Or
yes,
sex. Uh-huh.
absolutely. And they don't know how to process their thoughts or feelings, but they know that they want to get out of their head. So I'm going to use drugs. I'm going to misbehave, get myself into trouble. I'm going to engage in these other risky behaviors because it kind of allows me to separate what's in my head from what I'm doing. And so these maladaptive coping skills are very real and are utilized by people all over the globe every day. We see it.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily understand what's behind their use, behind the behaviors. But if you sit and think of or talk to these people and find out about their experiences, it's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Now let's try to find a healthy coping mechanism for you to use instead. Um, Candy, you asked me about
Oppositional defiant disorder,
oppositional defiance.
ODD.
So, when kids experience, and think of little children experiencing this trauma, they don't have the words to articulate this. They don't even know what they're feeling, what they've seen, what they've experienced. And it can often manifest in poor behavior. Oh, this kid is a bad student, or he always acts up in my class. Or they maybe start to engage in criminal activity. And unless you stop and really talk to that child about their experience and figure out what's behind this is also their way of coping
Right.
with what they've experienced. And it's almost like, well, nothing else is working for me. And they're angry, but they don't know how to say they're angry. So they'll hit, they'll fight, they'll bite, because they don't have the tools they need in order to process what's happening with them.
Right. You have to understand the bereavement history, and the bereavement doesn't necessarily apply to the death of somebody. It can apply to the incarceration of a parent, the parent who just left. So these kids are grieving
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know how to process that. And it's not that somebody died, they're
Right.
still alive, but there's still a loss.
Yeah, there is absolutely a loss, a loss of their childhood, of this person that might have done me wrong, but I still love that person.
Mhm.
And how do you process that? I mean, it's hard enough for an adult to process that. How do you do that as a child? And when we're talking about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, we're talking about that time frame between 0 and 18 years old. Okay? We know that our executive functioning isn't fully formed until we're 26. So how is a 7-year-old supposed to be able to process and understand what's going on with them?
Right. And I just want to point out that when those kids go to school, they may acquire these labels because somebody hasn't stopped to say, oh my gosh, you're 6 years old and you have to walk to school and you live in a high crime neighborhood and you've heard gunshots. And what's that going to be like? Is
Right.
that kid going to want to come to school? Is that kid going to be ready to learn when they do get to school?
Right.
So you have to understand the whole child rather than just the behavior
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
really want to help a child.
Absolutely. You have to really be curious enough about that child to find out what is at the root of this.
Right.
And believe me, kids know when the teacher doesn't like them. Kids are well aware of this. I remember a client who the teachers didn't like him, the principal didn't like him. I might have been the first person to come into that school and provide any sort of unconditional, safe, comfortable space for him. And this child didn't know how to articulate what he had been through. These teachers, these principals, they are overworked. We know this. God bless them for the work that they do. But they didn't have the time, the wherewithal to find out what was going on with this child. So luckily, he found himself in therapy and we could kind of process together. But I want to share a story of a young man that I'll never forget. And Candy, you know this story.
Mhm.
Um, but several years ago, I was doing an intake for a client who was going into a group home, and he was coming out of the juvenile justice system. And we part of the intake is the ACE questionnaire, which is 10 questions. And the young man asked me if I could read the questions to him and he would simply answer, which I always offer to my clients in case maybe they're not comfortable reading aloud, reading themselves. So I'm asking these questions, and this is a big, strapping young man who was not happy to be there, did not want to engage with me. And I read through these questions, and he was answering yes, yes, yes to 8 out of 10 of them. When you get an ACE score of 4, that's significant. An ACE score of 8, wow. This young man broke into tears in my office, and we had a moment because he had never conceptualized his childhood like this before. And to recognize all of these traumas that he had experienced in those 0 to 18 years of age was really overwhelming for him in that moment. And to really think about all of the things that he had been through was really, really difficult. And so I saw this kid who was very resistant to even having a conversation with me, to breaking down, rightfully so, and being able to have a conversation. And I'll just never forget him.
How did he do after that? Did you see him routinely?
So I was not his ongoing
Mm,
therapist. I
mm.
was the intake therapist, but yeah, he would come into the office and I would see him. I always have snacks in my office for our kids. So he knew that he could come to me and check in with me, and I would see him in the halls and just
Mhm.
pop in and say hello. Um, but having that moment with him created a relationship, a bond with this kid.
Mhm.
And perhaps if he had not shared the way he had, that bond would have not existed. Um, but since he did, we were able to work together.
Yeah. I think it's also very important to recognize that your brain actually changes when you're exposed to trauma. Um, the amygdala is part of the most primitive part of the brain, and it is the part of the brain responsible for sensing alarm. I remember it by saying alarming Amy. And if a child, say for instance, grows up in a crime-ridden neighborhood where he or she has seen a dead body, hears gunshots, that area is always going to be activated.
Mhm.
So if that area is constantly activated, they tend to perceive things that aren't threatening as a threat. Therefore, that child is going to be more confrontational, more difficult, less likely to resolve problems by
Mhm.
talking, and more likely to fight. Now, there's other parts of the brain, for instance, the locus ceruleus. That's the part of the brain that is senses alarm also. I remember it because ceruleus is blue, so seeing blue. And I cannot think of it off the top of my head. So I'm going to look at this paper. Let's
Yeah, we're
see.
referring to the notes that we used
Right, right,
for our
right.
talk. They're right here.
Because remember, I'm a child abuse doctor, not a neurologist. Let's see. Okay, so the locus ceruleus. Where are you? Okay. So that part, I said sees blue and it regulates impulse control. So when that area is dysregulated, you're going to have more anxiety, increased arousal, and increased aggression. And then, of course, it's going to affect your sleep-wake cycle. What happens when you can't sleep? You're cranky, you're agitated, you become difficult. And then, of course, if you have a dysregulated locus ceruleus, you won't be able to go to school and learn. That's why so many of these kids who have these adverse childhood experiences, these high ACEs, perform poorly at school. You know, a child who is able to go to school and their only thing that they have to do is concentrate on learning, that's a position of privilege.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that, you know, you and I used to walk to school and we didn't have anything except thinking about our homework or, you know, what was mommy going to make for dinner. But a lot of kids, they don't know what's for dinner. They don't, you know,
They might not get dinner.
right. And maybe they have to fight people to get to school. So then let's talk about this other part of the brain, the ventral tegmental area. This is going way back into my basic science knowledge, 1989 when I learned this stuff. By the way, my 30-year medical school reunion's coming up. But the ventral tegmental area, that's the area of the brain that senses reward and pleasure and addiction. Dopamine is if your body is overloaded with stress, then your dopamine receptors lose their sensitivity. So if your body is overloaded, what do? You try and get the dopamine. How do you get the dopamine? You get the dopamine through sugar. You get the dopamine through drug use. And that goes to why a lot of people experiencing trauma, a breakup, anything, they'll eat ice cream or eat, you know, something sugary or eat something high in fat because it increases your dopamine. So, you know, I said in the conference, nobody was ever super stressed and had ate a stress salad. That doesn't happen. You know, we eat stuff that comfort food, stuff that makes us feel good. And then let's talk about the dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. You know, the fight or flight response, we know about that, and people have different responses to you know, things that cause fear. Judy, what are you, a fleer?
I flee.
You
I
flee.
run.
Uh-huh. And I'm a freak because I freeze. So I just look at the thing that's scaring me and I can't move and I want to move and I don't move. But you know, with regard to the autonomic nervous system, it kind of keeps your body in check. It maintains a balance. But if you grow up with trauma, that is actually thrown off. And then, of course, the hormones get dysregulated. And let's not forget your immune system. If your immune system is in a constant state of alarm, or if your body is in a constant state of alarm, it will cause your immune system to send out stuff to combat pathogens and things coming in. And then kids or adults who experience trauma as children, they're more prone to autoimmune disorders. So this is what we're talking about. You could look perfectly healthy, but carry the emotional trauma of childhood trauma, and then you show up with cancer, because cancer frequently is a dysregulation of your immune system. It's your body turning on itself, and it's not your fault. And the thing is, this childhood trauma can lead to a shortened lifespan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because of the poor medical outcomes that can come about as a result of these traumas.
Right.
I don't think people really connect it. Like, oh, he had a stroke. But and people just think, oh, it's a stroke. But if you look back and you see this person's trauma, you really look into it, you're able to, going back to, again, to Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, you're able to connect that toxic stress to the stroke 40 years in advance.
Right. Yeah, the toxic stress led to cortisol overproduction of cortisol, led to hypertension, led to the stroke. Same thing with a heart attack because you have stress as a
Mhm.
childhood, you overeat, you become obese, and then you develop heart disease, you have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that we need to talk about is how stress and trauma ages you.
Oh, well, I think we've all seen that. I'm going to go to our former president, Barack Obama, when he entered the White House, um, head full of black hair.
Mhm.
As he exited the White House, the hair was gray. And so stress manifests in the body in different ways. And
Mhm.
one of those visible ways that we're able to see is the increased gray hair.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so oftentimes people can recognize that they've been have been in a stressful situation with the amount of gray hair that they have, that has started to accumulate.
And then on the just on the genetic level, at the end of your, excuse me, chromosomes, you have something called telomeres. People say telomeres, telomeres, and those are kind of like the little aglets at the end of your chromosomes that keep your chromosomes from unraveling. And your chromosomes unravel over time, and that contributes to aging. But when have increased trauma, it causes those telomeres to unravel
Mhm,
more
mhm.
quickly. So you might see somebody, I'm sure, I don't know if you have any people, your contemporaries, but you kind of heard that this person's had a hard life and you look at them and you go like, damn.
They look rough.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And trauma, your unraveling of telomeres, and that whole study of telomeres is a whole kind of anti-aging thing that people are looking into. But we've been talking about some of the adverse effects of trauma. What are some of the things that we can do to help lessen the effects?
So, and I have an answer for that, but before
Mhm.
I go there, I just wanna normalize trauma. I wanna normalize the fact that most of us walk around with some trauma. And the percentages, I'm just gonna refer back to this for a second, if I can find the page. Okay, so in this ACE study that was conducted, 20% of the people, and there were over
17,000.
17,000 people, 27% reported substance abuse in their home. 27%. Um, Parental separation or divorce, 23%. As a divorced person, I've already given my kids one on their score. And I recognize that as, you know, that is traumatic for children.
Yeah.
So how do we help them with this? Oh, the last sentence. So again, going back to the study, it showed that 23% of the people studied experienced a parent that was divorced or separated, and that is one of the questions on the ACE. And the fact that, a young child experiencing their parents separating, that is traumatic for them. And I know as a divorced person that I've given my kids one on their ACE score.
Mhm.
And I can't help but feel badly about that.
I remember thinking that also when the marriage fell apart. I'm like, man, they already won on their ACE score. And I,
Mhm.
I felt I felt really bad about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we do want to normalize that most of us are walking around with some aspect of trauma. It's not just you. Um, but let's talk, Candy, about what we can do to kind of
Mhm.
mitigate some of these issues. So you guessed it. I'm a big advocate of seeking therapy. Find a therapist, find somebody that you can talk to, that you can process a lot of these things with. Um, Utilize healthy coping mechanisms, journal, mindfulness, support group. All of these things can really have a positive impact on your outcomes, your mental health and your medical outcomes.
Yeah. And let's not forget the benefit of exercise. You
Mhm.
don't have to be pumping iron. If it's even just walking, like, I mean, I recently got a dog, Miss Reina Dora Grant, and, and, just walking with her and breathing in and looking up at the sky. And the thing is, it's exercise, but it's also mindfulness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's kind of like taking everything moment by moment, smelling the orange blossoms, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the wind or, whatever
Mhm.
little breeze you get on your
Mhm.
face. All of that is going to promote a healthier lifestyle. And then, of course, eating well.
Mhm.
Eating well is huge. If you eat processed foods, that's not going to be healthy for you. But you can, you can't take away the trauma, but you can certainly address it, get therapy, eat well, exercise, be mindful. Mindfulness is a word that people throw around. What exactly is mindfulness?
So mindfulness is a like a meditative practice.
Mhm.
Before we used to think just meditation, but now in the last several years, the term mindfulness has come into play, and people meditate. People become mindful, and being mindful is really about being in the present moment, experiencing what you're currently feeling in that moment, as opposed to perseverating on all of these other things and issues going on in your head. What are you doing for dinner? Who's got the dry cleaning? So on and so forth. Um, and just being very present. I could do a mindfulness exercise over the glass of water that I'm holding in my hand. I can feel it. I can see the texture, the ridges, the way I drink it. You can use mindfulness in so many daily activities to help you remain grounded and present.
Okay, well, thank you guys for listening. It has been really great to share with you a little bit about what we talked about in March at the Nexus conference.
Oh,
But
Candy, can I share something?
yeah, I
Oh,
guess you
sorry.
can go. Okay, you can go.
I
You
think
can
I was
go.
stealing her thunder.
Uh-huh.
So Candy and I did this talk for Nexus in March, and we actually applied for another conference.
Yeah.
Maybe about beginning of March, we applied to an international conference on the prevention of child abuse and neglect.
Mhm.
And what happened on May 1st?
I got an email and it said, "Congratulations, you have been selected to speak at the ISPCAN conference in
Edinburgh,
Scotland."
Scotland.
Yeah.
So Tusoka is going to be flying across the pond,
Uh-huh.
and we are going to be presenting a master class. Um,
You guys, a
again,
master class. A master class is 2 freaking hours.
yes. And again, we're going to be talking about the effects of childhood trauma on the medical and the mental health outcomes of that and how to mitigate that. But we are super excited to take Tusoka International.
Yes, yes.
It's crazy.
We're gonna be like in a two-soka sweatsuit, two-soka luggage, two-soka everything.
Yeah, but we're super excited to be able to share this message with others, and we manifested this, Candy.
Mhm,
We
we
put it
did.
out there that we wanted to do these speaking engagements together, and we're really excited about this one. And we will be bringing you along the ride, and I'm sure you'll hear much more about it between now and September. But we're super excited, and thanks to Tusoka for getting us out there and making this possible.
Yay.
Yeah, yay
So
us.
So, as usual, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of Tusoka. Please like, comment, share, and rate us. We want to get our numbers up so that we can end up on TV and
With
can
Oprah.
with Oprah and can be used as a resource for people in the community and beyond. And you can reach us on Instagram. We're at the number two, Sisters of a Certain Age. Email us at tusokapodcast@gmail.com. And anything else?
I would just like to thank our producers, No Longer Network, and I'd like to thank our Uncle Keith, Keith Jacks, who created our theme music Up For It.
And you can reach him at Third Rail Productions. He's on Facebook. You can message him.
So we want to thank you for joining us today. And we just want to say that if you have also experienced trauma in your childhood, please know that we can relate.
No Longer Network.